Phumla, I want to bring you in here, and I'm sure you have a lot of notes to share with us as our legal expert on the panel. And I think your career is interesting because you come from the other side where you were talent and you understand that aspect, and then you went and studied law, and now you're representing the talent, right? So from your perspective, what do you take from all of this, specifically touching on points raised like by Simpiwe talking about the fact that there is that element of free use from a documentary perspective, that they would like to have access to that. What is the legal implication of that? We've heard a lot from Bobby from the we've heard a lot from Bobby in terms of the employment aspects and the implications of that, and also from our other panelists. I mean, also from Nick, just where animation sits and some of the unique aspects in that legally. If you could just wrap up for us and let us know, from your perspective, how are you processing everything?
Thanks, Ziggy. What an exciting discussion. And I just want to start off by saying that I endorse what Katio was saying, in that this is a brilliant opportunity to start having these discussions. And for me, what's exciting is that there are, previously, like you say, my previous background is that I was talent, and talent is often not interested in what legislation has to do or say. Talent is interested in creating content and then performing that content. And so what was interesting for me, being part of talent, is to realize how important it was to get your understanding of what a legislative environment looked like for the industry. And I think in all the discussions from the first panel into this one, the big buzzword has been an enabling environment, an enabling legislative environment. And most people wouldn't understand what that means. What does an enabling environment mean for this industry, which is so diverse with so many different sectors? We've got animation, we've got, it's very, very diverse. And I think what government may have missed is an important point to go into the different sectors and do a proper impact assessment to understand how each sector is impacted by the laws that they are legislating. And I think the opportunity now is not to then fast track the legislation and pass it into law, is to stop. COVID forced us to stop. So use this opportunity of this, drastic global stop to say, okay, we have a elephant in the room, which is the Copyright Amendment Bill. It's not going away, and more voices are coming to the forefront, and more people are becoming aware what this legislation looks like and what impact it has, the negative or the impact that I don't think, obviously the unintended negative impact that it will have. When Bobby speaks of freedom, as the industry by nature is a free-natured industry, but when you take away certain freedoms like freedom to contract, government needs to understand what it does for an international investor or a producer locally who's trying to purchase rights, like Nick was saying, and I think for me, what I would then add to that is that there is such a need for information dissemination to the industry. From a government point of view, and also from the different organizations that do represent the different sectors. For me, what I find often is that a lot of the buzzwords that are going around and being spoken about are coming from an uninformed position. But when people begin to understand the impact of all these laws and legislation and how they will impact their sectors, then they sit back and they stop, and the narrative changes. We had several discussions where producers and performers, even performers who were thinking this is great for them, sit back and realize this may not be the greatest, rainbow solution for us. And I think the most important thing for us to then look into is, can we afford a disinvestment into this industry, into the country, at a time when we are moving into a digital, fast-paced era where we're part of a global space. We can't operate as South Africa in a very, cornered environment. We have to look at how the world is viewing South Africa from an attractive location point of view, but are we a high-risk location? And if we are, we have to engage and say what will then work best to attract that investment while encouraging economic growth for the industry. And then just going to what Siphiwe was saying, and I think the problem is that a lot of misinformation has been disseminated around what the bills will, provide. In other words, it's kind of like a lucky packet. We've got these bills and you open them up and there's all these great things that are being promised. But for example, we're not going to be able to access the archives of BBC by having fair use. It's not. It doesn't allow that. So things that need to be looked in is, like I'm saying, the impact should go into the documentary filmmakers. Maybe specific exceptions can be legislated that are that meet their needs. But from a position when we talk about, is there an opportunity? There's absolutely an opportunity to start engaging vigorously in province. I'm excited with what's going to happen. Hopefully, like Katia was saying, it has to be fixed. The legislation has to go back to the drawing board. We have to engage, society, creatives. We have to have a proper impact assessment done, and then we can get it right.
Yeah, thank you so much for those contributions. And before we wrap up our panel discussion, I do also want to get a final word from everybody, just to know, action step process. What is your one thing that you're like, okay, for this to work, for the industry to grow, for the industry to be successful, to be sustainable, this is what we need to happen. And I'm going to start with Simphiwe, who's joining us virtually. Simphiwe, what's your one thing that needs to happen going forward?
I think for the Documentary Filmmakers Association is really fixing the public broadcaster. I mean, in many countries around the world, that is where mostly documentary filmmakers, find a platform to express themselves. And currently at the moment, in South Africa, it is quite difficult, to do that. So, we need to actually lower that, barrier to entry, because, documentary filmmakers end up staying in the YouTube space, and so they just produce content to be freely used and never be able to make revenue out of it. So we need to actually, to be able to actually have access to the public platform and be able to actually have a sizable slot there to be able to, showcase our craft. And also in the process as well, encourage, things like citizen journalism that actually, because of documentaries by their nature, ordinary citizens are able to actually, create their own stories that can actually be able to sit, on these platforms. Yes, we're excited about the likes of Netflix and that are there, but there's very little access, for emerging filmmakers to be able to access such platforms unless you are really established.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm coming to studio. I'm going to start that side with you, Katia. What is your one thing that needs to happen?
I think we need to make our legislative environment accessible so that we can do the work that we want to do. We can work internationally with co-producers. We can bring resources into the country. We can find the DTI can bring make the environment conducive for people to access the rebate. It's about making things work rather than making things clog up, and some of the legislation has really been creating log jams, and so we need to persuade people that actually the opposite is possible. Yeah. If we are able to see ourselves as a global player, and if we look at places like Brazil, there was a huge growth, America, huge growth, there's huge growth in the industry, and that is providing jobs. That is creating an economic basis for growing. It's not just going to be gold. We are going to be the new gold as a creative sector. So we need to persuade government and make them understand that that is possible, that we can really be positive.
So less hurdles from them and more facilitation for growth and success. Phumla, your final?
We have to get our copyrights to be corrected. We should stop beating around the bush around that. It's important to get this environment to attract investment. We have to engage society, creatives in industry around what it means for them. We also have to remember what the principle of copyright is, and we cannot overextend copyright to users at the detriment of producers or copyright owners. We have to ensure that government understands the needs of the industry specifically for each sector and how it affects each sector, how it affects animation, how it affects and do a proper analysis on what those legislative provisions that are being imposed will have, so that we continue to grow this industry, to be the next Hollywood and take the content globally and attract more investment into the industry. So I think for me, it's the buzzword is and legislative environment has to be fixed, and we actually need to stop having dialogues around whether it's wrong. It is incorrect currently. There's no clarity. It's ambiguous. It's creating a discomfort for any investor. It's what it's done. It's actually done a holdback for a couple of years. If you look at the entertainment industry, people plan for about 3 years around production and investment. So already we're sitting at a position where we are likely to not see vigorous investment for the next 3 years. So we have to get it right so we can invite that investment back into the country.
I love that honesty, that it's not about whether it's right or wrong. It's not working. Let's stop and we need to fix it. Nick, your final thought on the one thing that needs to happen?
Yeah, we need certainty and predictability on our incentives. That's for damn sure. What I think we also need to think about is identifying and enhancing our value proposition, whatever that may be. So, and we have to keep working on that. So, in the sense that we're culturally aligned to some of the most developed film and television industries abroad, good time zones, so when they're sleeping, we're awake, and when we're working, when they're sleeping, we're and so on and so forth, and vice versa. We have to, the rate of exchange, we have to leverage all of these advantages to our favor.
Yeah. And we're in a good position to do that.
I think we are, yeah. And like everyone's saying, just to echo the same sentiments, is that we need a good policy framework and regulatory environment, because without which we're not going to be as competitive, and there's going to be reasons for people to look elsewhere. So anything that deters or disincentivizes investment or service coming away from South Africa, this is something we have to address.
Yeah. Thandi, your one thing?
My one thing is we have to get back to work, and seriously back to work. And one of the big things that is preventing us from doing so is insurance and COVID insurance. So government needs to come to the party and discuss with the sector how we can get back to work and get productions up and running, and being able to have people covered on set, so sets don't come to a standstill because someone is ill. Productions don't fall apart because of that. So it's about getting back to work, and it's about working with our sector to make sure, from an insurance perspective and from a coverage for the pandemic, we are back at work and they come to the party to assist producers with doing just that.
Fantastic. And then quickly, Bobby, your one thing.
There's nothing quick about me. I think the biggest thing is that a vacuum has been created in this industry where producers are not being heard. What's happening is everybody else is coming, every advocacy group, every interest group is coming in, and they're having the dialogue with government. And because we are too busy doing what we do and fixing 1,000 problems every day to keep the wheels turning, we are being ignored. And I think what we really need to do is, we have differences in our approach and the way that we do things, but I think producers really need to come together across the spectrum, basically, and start talking more to each other, and start informing the conversations that government are having about our industry. Because if we don't do that, someone else is going to do that, and that's going to lead to a catastrophe. So I say my one bit thing that I want to do is to see producers taking the power back.
Fantastic. And here you are representing all the producers. So hopefully this conversation continues beyond this particular panel discussion. Thank you very much to Simpiwe for joining us virtually. And thank you so much to all of my panelists for joining us in studio and sharing your thoughts and insights and just contributing to this conversation. I definitely know we can say a lot more. And unfortunately, time isn't on our side, but I really do appreciate your contribution. We are going to take a brief break and get our panelists for the third discussion. And looking at that conversation, we're really going to hear from people who've gone global and who, when we were talking about the film industry and when we were talking about making it successful and sustainable, we're going to hear stories of productions that have gone out there and that are making an impact. So we'll be back in studio shortly.